This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. We begin feedback this week with an email from a listener called Anne.
How much radio is to be ruined by its presenters wanting a jolly to Edinburgh? Those in front of a live audience in a tent programmes just serve to exclude the regular audience. I'm so glad you are too sensible to have succumbed to the lure.
Sorry, Anne. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is just too weak. So, welcome to Feedback in Edinburgh. We're in the BBC's Blue Tent on the corner of Potter Row and Marshall Street, having fought our way past jugglers, fire eaters and flyer-flapping promoters. Where better for Feedback to come to consider comedy on the radio? Joining me on the stage, I have some giants from the BBC world of radio comedy who can make or break careers with a flick of an eyelid. Caroline Raphael is Commissioner for Comedy and Fiction. Head of radio for BBC Scotland is Jeff Szusinski, and BBC comedy producer Colin Anderson. Now, Caroline, how do you justify your presence here at the festival?
Coming to Edinburgh is really important for me. I always see it. It's like being a squirrel and harvesting lots of programmes, seeing lots of new talent, filling up the cupboard. Quite honestly, for the next year, sometimes a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, you find yourself talking to producers, talking to talent, talking to agents, and you will refer back to Anne Edinburgh. You capture the spirit of comedy, what people are saying, how they're saying it, and you store it all up.
But, Colin Anderson, what are you doing here? Because you normally make the Now show with very experienced comedians. Are you still looking for new talent for a show like that?
Yes, we're still looking for new talent for the Now show to some extent, but we're also looking... I make lots of different programmes for Radio 4, so I've got a stand-up show hosted by Stephen K. Amos coming up in the new year, which has got a different bill in each episode and themes, and so I need people for that. I need to find new shows and new talent to develop to pitch different series to Radio 4.
Jeff, do you hope, as part of your job here, Head of Radio Scotland, to encourage these people to look over there and miss the best talent so you can keep it?
No, it's not just the biggest comedy festival in the world, it's the biggest arts festival in the world. And sometimes you can make the mistake of thinking that you're coming here to see Scottish comedy. I'm not coming here to see Scottish comedy. I can see Scottish comedy in clubs in Edinburgh and Glasgow all year round. What you're seeing here is some of the best performances, artists, writers in the world in the English language and beyond.
Well, that's the BBC talent, but we can't really have a Feedback comedy special without some intentionally comic talent. So can I welcome to the stage a man whose poster here in Edinburgh says he's appeared on almost every radio programme. So how could we be left out? Marcus Brigstock. Marcus, please take a seat. And before we discuss your relationship with the capital of North Britain, I think we should play a clip of a recent edition of your Radio 4 show, The Brig Society.
With any luck, installing a well-spoken Englishman as their king will give the Scotch a chance to have the arguments explained to them in a way that they will understand and decide not to go. Alex Salmond's very optimistic about it all. He describes the Scottish economy as a Celtic tiger, which is a lot like a normal tiger, except it's pissed and it's got type 2 diabetes. Slumped in a shop doorway with a fag on, can of iron brew, can't really growl anymore like that.
Marcus, how would you summarise your attitudes to Edinburgh? You've been maimed, I notice.
I have, yes. I ruptured my Achilles tendon during my second show. I had slightly anticipated being injured at this year's festival because that episode of the Brig Society went out 10 days before I came up here, and it was one where I appointed myself King of Scotland. And basically, I was very careful with that show. I structured it in such a way that the first half was taking the mick out of the Yes campaign and out of Scottish people, and then the second half was owning up to what sort of neighbour England is. But the people that I'd upset had switched off long before then.
Our first question is from James Hind in the audience here.
Do you feel that there's a lack of good political satire on the radio or in mainstream media?
Well, let's come to someone who perhaps should answer that, because he's concerned with satire. Do you have to struggle, to get good people?
We work hard to get good people. I don't think it's a struggle. I think we work with a lot of very talented writers. There's a lot of
No, yeah, I know you're
stand-ups.
going to say that. You obviously do. But in terms of the raw material, are there only a handful of people who can really do it well?
It's an aptitude and an interest in politics, and there's lots of comedians that are touring around doing observational comedy about shoes, and there's a smaller group who are doing political satire, and I think it's in really good health.
Oh, well, here's a question from a listener at home on this very issue.
My name is Ian Nenny from the New Forest in Hampshire. My question is, why is so much BBC radio comedy, especially things like The Now Show and The News Quiz, so left-wing?
Chancellor George Osborne has announced a new system of childcare vouchers which will not be available to stay-at-home mothers who he described as having made a lifestyle choice. Osborne pointed out that while being a stay-at-home mum is a lifestyle choice, being an out-of-touch, massively rich git is genetic.
You all seem to think that you can throw in one anti-Labour joke in 27 minutes and consider yourselves even-handed.
But here's Labour now with their 45-minute WMD claim, and is it enough? Yes, yes it is. What a massive and horrible figure to massage and misrepresent, and it's back to the paddock for Labour for at least 5 years, I'd guess.
Well, Caroline, this is a complaint we receive frequently at Feedback, often levelled at both the News Quiz and, of course, the Now Show. Is it difficult to find right-wing comics?
It's difficult to find right-wing comics, that's true, but whatever their politics are, and you don't go up to a comedian and say, oh, hello, I'm X, would you like to be on Radio 4, and by the way, who do you vote for?
No, but if you're Mark Steele or Jeremy Hardy, they'll tell you before you...
They will tell you, but again, we never ever assume. But I think the point is that satire will always go for the kind of the ruling body. So it is natural that in Sandy's joke, for example, that she will go for the government of the day because they're the ones in power, they're the ones we need. We need to have a different take on what they're doing. In comedy, our job is to give the listener a range of views that are being expressed by comedians. We're not there to balance things up in a purely impartial way. We have to prove that we are broadcasting the range of views that are within the comedy world. And
Sorry, the satire has a function, and that function is afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That is what satire is for. Never mind whether it's an attack on the left or the right. Afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That is the point.
Kim Clemenson, you're in the audience, I think. You want to talk? Yeah, at the front here. Can we get the microphone to Kim? Yeah, your question, please.
Hello. How do you think Scottish independence, if yes, would affect BBC coverage of The Fringe?
Whoa, Jeff, question for you.
I'm not answering that. You know the official line from the BBC is we're not making any assumptions about the outcome of a referendum. So you're putting me in a bit of a corner here. How would it make it? I don't know. Any change to the constitution and the government should not affect the way a broadcaster decides to cover a big arts festival. I mean, it's the idea that everything in our society is wrapped up in the outcome of this referendum.
No, but if there's a joke, if a lot of jokes about Alex Salmond, you're really telling me you're not going to say, please give me a joke about David Cameron or Alistair Darling or somebody like that?
It's the question, how, as we get near that referendum, is it going to be an issue for the BBC? Certainly, as I can imagine this time next year at the Fringe and on these kind of shows, we will have comedians kind of using the topicality of that referendum to find gags. What the issue for me is, I don't care as long as it's funny. The issue for me is if it's naive, and is so naive because it's ill-informed and the audience are well ahead of the debate.
If there is a yes vote and Alex Salmond is able to deliver the low-tax economy that he's been talking about, there's a good chance Jimmy Carr will move here in order to avoid making the contribution that I feel he should be making.
Well, I tell you what, I'm more struck by Billy Connolly's line, which an approach to politics, which is simply politicians don't vote for them, it just encourages them. You know, now, if we had more comedians like that in our areas, my job would be quite easy.
Well, now, back in February on Feedback, we featured a poem from one of our listeners, Mark Neal, the Poet Laureate of Milton Keynes. Well, Mark is up here in Edinburgh with his show Rhythm Method. Bit of a hit and miss. So we've asked him to contemplate the wonders of radio comedy. Can you please welcome Mark Neal?
Thank you. It's great to be at Feedback at the Fringe. I don't know if you encountered the Milton Keynes Poetry Massive before, but I'm him. What is the Fringe without audience participation? So you can get your voice heard on Radio 4 by joining in on the last word of each verse of this poem called Double Act. Don't worry, you'll know it when you get there. French and Saunders, Clouseau and Cato, Mitchell and Webb, Abbott and... Vic and Bob, Punt and Dennis, Nasher and Dennis the... Flanagan and Allen, Will and Grace, Hinge and Brackett, Hale and... Morecambe and Wise, Donkey and Shrek, Laurel and Hardy, Ant and... Pete and Dud, Homer and Marge, Smith and Jones, Little and... These are double acts, 2 into 1, like Barker and Corbett, Flanders and... But Cameron and Clegg, that's not funny. Thank you. Yes, more left-wing bias. I will be also taking the mickey out of the opposition when they do something. This next poem, my last poem, is about the never-ending quest for people to get onto Radio 4, and it's called Big Break. Radio 4 is the holy grail for performers who want to be top draw. So there's not much work I wouldn't touch if it got me on Radio 4. I'd get up every day at the crack of dawn if today knocked on my door. I'd even make John Humphreys take HRT if it got me on Radio 4. I'd blow the whistle on Just a Minute. I'd even keep the score. I'd listen to Hesitations and Lies before Nicholas Parsons dies if it got me on Radio 4. I'd blow the whistle on Just a Minute. Bzz, repetition. At after-show parties for the cast of Clue, if alcohol turned the stars into bores, I'd babysit Barry Cryer until he was drier if it got me on Radio 4. I'd even play a pig on The Archers. I'd grunt and oink and snore, and every Monday I'd snog Eddie Grundy. Oh no, if it got me on Radio 4. Finally, I've made it. I'm here on Feedback, the promised land with only one flaw. I now have to behave as Roger Bolton's slave. That's how I got onto Radio 4. Thank you very much. I've been Mark Neal. Goodbye.
Our thanks to Mark Neal. Well, we can't really have an edition of Feedback devoted to the subject of comedy without mentioning this.
You can call me Count Arthur. What do they call you?
Miguel.
Well, very nice to meet you, Mingle.
Count Arthur Strong, unbelievably, his show debuted nearly 8 years ago. There have been 7 radio series, and it's just had its first one on TV, but my word, does it split the audience. Over the years, we've heard from so many people either saying how brilliant it is or how absolutely awful. Caroline, I think you commissioned him, didn't you?
I did, yeah. And interestingly, as we're in Edinburgh, the very, very first time I saw the Count Arthur Strong, I won't spoil it by mentioning the actor's name, was in Edinburgh, in a tiny room, decades ago.
It was, as they say, a very brave commission. It splits the audience. It still splits the audience. Any regrets?
No, none whatsoever. And that's interesting you say brave, because I don't see it as a brave.
Well, your controller of Radio 2, who's just put Count Arthur Strong on television, said well, ratings aren't brilliant. This is Marmite comedy. I mean, it's right down the middle. Hate or love. Is that all right for Radio 4?
Yeah, of course it is. If everybody hated it, that might be something. But I adore it, obviously, although I do commission some things that I don't find funny, but no, I'm not going to tell you what they are. But I know that there is an audience for it, and that's my job. But I've been to see recordings, been really lucky to see recordings of Count Arthur Strong, and I have seen grown men virtually fall off their chairs in laughter. Just think it's the funniest thing.
And is it coming back to, sorry to interrupt you, is it coming back to radio, or does the TV series mean the end of it for radio?
I hope it's not the end of it. What we say to shows, and like Jeff,
sorry,
I'm always sad.
Press you on that. Hope. That means you hasn't signed up for another radio series.
No, but what we say...
you would commission him.
Yeah, no, what we say to lots of people who go off to television, and there is one big act coming back, and I can't say who it is yet, is the door is always open, and that's not a platitude, we mean it. The door is always open.
Let's come to the audience here in Edinburgh again, and I think Peter Gordon's got a question. Peter, can you put your hand up? Yeah, in the front row here, if we get the mic to Peter.
Do you think of the likely size of the audience when commissioning shows, or is it secondary? And do you consider audience appreciation as well as size?
Jeff, let's put that to you.
Yes, both.
Do you have a target for each slot and say, if they don't reach this number of listeners, goodbye?
If they reach no listeners, then you would say goodbye. But comedy is interesting in a number of ways. First of all, it's very expensive. On the other hand, if it's good comedy and it's repeatable, it's got a long tail to it. And then you look at issues such as not just the numbers who are coming to it, the longevity of it, but also the audience appreciation.
OK, briefly, Caroline, if you get a low ratings and a good AI, those who do listen think it's very good, do you tend to stick with it?
Deciding to bring something back or deciding to stop it, it's a whole collection of things. It's your own gut instinct, it's the audience reaction, it's what people say to you. It's when you... The thing I love is when you get the completely unprompted response, which may sometimes be, oh, just doesn't do it for me, but other people coming up on the stairs or at the bus stop, or you overhear people saying, have you heard that show about? They can never remember titles, but have you heard that show about? So it's a whole collection of things before you decide whether to recommission or cancel.
Right, another question from our audience here in Edinburgh from Luke Vinicum. Luke, can you put your hand up? Yeah, Luke? Yep.
How far can you take comedy before it crosses the boundaries of, like, offensive material?
Well, we receive...
Should it matter?
Well,
in all seriousness, should it matter if it crosses a line of offence? Would to be offended not be a decent thing and tell you that you care about something and therefore a line has been crossed and informed you, oh, right, that's a line that I myself would not cross? Why does anybody imagine that offence is a line that should not be crossed?
A lot of people write to us say, look, radio is so special, it's inside your head, it's very intimate. I don't want to be surprised and shocked. And by the way, in term time, out in holiday time, when kids are there, why are you saying all these things?
Well, it would be a terribly mean trick just to explode something absolutely out of nowhere. That I think would be irresponsible, and I would choose as a creator not to do that. I think if someone's listening to something that I've written, I think there'd be a pretty good idea of the direction it's going and enough time to switch over to one of the many, many other channels on television and radio provided not just by the BBC but many other broadcasters, and there are still books.
Jeff, what what offends people in Scotland apart from when Marcus Brigstock makes jokes about something?
And that that offends very few people. I'm sorry, it doesn't. But
offence is a real thing.
The things that offend people in Scotland are naivety of the situation in Scotland. Things that used to offend people or offend certain sections of the audience were the whole Glasgow Rangers polarity and the people who are obsessed with that. Now we're getting a kind of creeping offence or manufactured offence about where you sit on the political spectrum. The thing is, I often write letters, the kind of letters you get, Roger, to people who say they are offended, and I begin with the standard sentence, it was not our intention to offend, and I've often paused at that point and think, was it our intention to offend? Am I truthful there? No, it's never our intention to offend, but on the other hand, we don't commission with a view that it's going to be inoffensive, because if you approach commissioning with everything has to be inoffensive, then it becomes bland, neutral, not very interesting. Things will offend depending on where you're coming from.
Well, of course, Edinburgh's all about spotting new talent, so here is... Feedback's fringe favourite. His stand-up show is called Buffering. Please welcome onto the stage Michael Fabry.
Hello. Hello. Nice to be on Radio 4, the home of intelligent speech. I'm not as intelligent as I'd like to be. Dyslexic is what I am. That's what they told me at school. I don't like the term dyslexia. Teachers used to try and sell it to me when I was at school. Michael, you have a condition called dyslexia, which actually means you're very intelligent. You just can't show it in any way, shape or form. It's humiliating. I can't spell. That's one of my worst things. I still can't spell. When I write on my computer, it underlines nearly everything in red. And then when I turn on the spell checker, it still doesn't know. It goes, no suggestions. I don't know what you're trying to do here, mate. I've got 200,000 words programmed to me, or not in the ballpark of one of those words. I wish that Office and Word and all that are the same spell check Google's got. Google's amazing. It just seems to know... You can just headbutt the keyboard. It goes, do you mean Fiddler's First Opening Times? It just knows, whereas Office and all that underlines wrong. I don't like it when it underlines things in green, because then it's really vague what the problem is. It just goes, oh no, consider revising this. It's wrong, but I'm not telling you how. You just do it again. My iPhone's got a spell checker on it, but what that does, it suggests a replacement for the word. It underlines things in red, suggests a replacement. The replacement's never the word I want. So in the end, I just give up and just spell the word wrong. But then it remembers the misspelling and then suggests it to me next time I'm trying to write that word. It goes, do you mean this? Yeah, well, it's wrong. I've had the phone 2 years now. It's thick now. It's stupid. And I've made it that way. That's the depressing thing. It was fine when I got it. It was full of hope and dreams, and I've made it stupid. I can't function without these things, spell checkers and all that. I just can't. I can't deal without them. I resent it, particularly when they correct your grammar. That's more a personal thing. I had an auntie when I was a kid used to correct the way I spoke all the time. She'd go, "It's like fingernails down a blackboard to me, Michael. You don't speak properly. It's not with who, it's with whom." Or just things that didn't make any sense. You say, "Auntie, will you come with me to the shop?" "Speak properly, Michael. It's not will you come with me to the shop. It's the shop to come me will you with." It's like fingernails down a blackboard to me. When she died and she was in her coffin, I ran my fingernails down her face. She was horrible. And I do think when someone dies and unanimously everybody in the family did not like that person, you should have fun with their body. You shouldn't just bury it. Have people saying, "Oh, I heard about Joyce. Did you have her buried or cremated?" Catapulted, actually. Yeah, we took her down the seafront. They've got one of those bungee cages, and we just lay her on the front of that and ping the old cow into the sea. So buried at sea, I suppose, but cremated as well, because we poured petrol and set fire to her. It was quite beautiful, actually. Her flaming corpse reflected off the water. It was a lovely service. Anyway, I've got to go. Thank you very much. Bye.
Michael Fabry, who is considerably younger than me, in fact nearly everybody is, but the average age of the Radio 4 listener is around the mid-50s. So is the network trying to gain a younger audience through comedy?
Mr. D. Thompson, Northumberland. I know the only concern of the BBC is to appeal to the future younger audience, but can it please give some consideration to its long-suffering older listeners who can't abide this new-age comedy drivel? The same unfunny jokes repeated, just in a different setting. I'd be interested to know if there's anyone over 50 deciding what passes for comedy at the BBC.
Well, Caroline, I won't reveal your age, but you do remember educating Archie, don't you? Perhaps the Navy Lark, something like that? Radio 4 is desperate to get what it calls replenishers. Just too many people dying off, even the audiences, although the audiences are going up. You want a younger audience. Are you tasked to get them through comedy?
No, but it's fantastic when they listen. And can we be really clear what we mean by replenish and what we mean by young? We're talking about people in their sort of early to mid-30s.
Young.
Yes, yes, for you and I, Roger.
Yeah, young.
Such a long time ago, I can't remember. But no, on a serious note, and I think people think we want sort of the 18, 20-year-olds. If they want to listen, and they do listen, that's fantastic. It's that it's about getting people into the Radio 4 habit is quite important. And comedy is one way of doing it. And it shows that there is more to Radio 4 than the Archers or the News, because in the end, those are the big programmes that drive our audience. That's where the spikes are, the Archers and the News.
And sorry to interrupt, Jeff, are you doing the same thing? You're using comedy, if you can, to bring younger people into your programming in the hope that they'll stay and listen to other things?
Yeah, I mean, in the way that Caroline's tried to define replenishers, I'm trying to define in my head what you mean by younger audiences. I mean, I turned 50 this year and I'm still in the full throes of my midlife crisis.
Well, what's the average age of people listening to Radio Scotland?
It's about 52.
Right, okay,
so,
younger than that.
But comedy is one of those things that gets a kind of cross-generational audience, but that's not to say that on Radio Scotland, for instance, coming up we've got a series with Billy Connolly. Similarly, we've got Des Clark. We've been out recording things with newcomers like Julia Sutherland. The comedy crosses all the generations, and the listeners come to it in that way as well.
Caroline?
One of the great things about Commission Comedy on Radio 4 is I've got 4 different places I can put it. So we can have comedy in the morning, comedy at 6:30, comedy late night. So to a certain extent, you can cover the gamut of ages because you do know who's available to listen. So at 6:30, when you have people in their early 30s have a chance of listening, where on the whole they're not available in the morning, they're available possibly on Sunday evening, they're certainly available in late night when we do it. It's about wanting to bring in as broad an audience as possible,
But you're
and
not
then,
getting,
targeting.
but you're not getting such a broad audience, are you? In the sense that you get old and young people, but not often listening to the same thing. This does divide the audience more than almost anything else you broadcast on Radio 4.
I haven't got the exact demographics in front of me, but I do know that sort of nearly 6 million adults listen to comedy, which is an enormous amount. It's what's nearly a tenth of the population, adult population of this country. And we do know, and you would see it actually when you come and do shows like this, you can see the age of the audience. We do know it will bring in a younger audience, but it's not there to do it. It's there to hopefully
the other thing,
please as
Carolyn,
many people
Julie,
as possible.
it's not just the comedy; it's the availability to listen.
Yes.
If you're out working, you cannot listen to something until you get home at night. So therefore, you are getting a younger audience for your comedy at 6:30.
Yeah, we get the 6:30 comedy has a bigger group of these. What sort of, I think we say 34 to about 45 is what we say the replenishers are.
Right. Marcus, do you think one of the problems here is that Radio 1, I remember Radio 1 used to do comedy, Radio 2 used to do rather more.
Yeah.
Radio 4's having to do it all. Would you like to see comedy back?
Such a shame that Radio 1 and Radio 2 are not making comedy. I really, really wish that they were. I think it would provide opportunities to people for whom Radio 4 would be unlikely to find a suitable audience for them. Although, just on that point, I think it is a mistake to imagine that people divide their comedy tastes up according to how old they are. My stand-up audience tells me otherwise. I have people come and see my shows who are 50, 60 and 70, and on the last tour, 82 is my personal best on that. So I don't think it's right to imagine that older people like something and middle-aged people like something else and younger people like, there's a lot of fantastic Radio 4 output that appeals to lots.
And just seeing the audiences at the Fringe in general.
Absolutely. I'm sorry I haven't a clue in just a minute. I mean, it's hard to imagine that those don't appeal to any age group.
But Colin, do you agree with Marcus that it would be nice if Radio 1 really had comedy?
Oh, absolutely. It would be great if there was a lot more, but at the same time, I think you shouldn't be pinning comedy to a particular age group. I think Monty Python and the Goons and things all ruffled people's feathers, and they said, why are you listening to that terrible comedy? And now some of those people are saying that about the next generation.
Well, thanks very much indeed. That's all for feedback for this week and for this series. We're back in October. Many thanks to our guests, Caroline Raphael, Jeff Szynski, Colin Anderson and Marcus Brigstock. And thanks also to the poetry talent, who is Mark Neal, and Feedback's Fringe favourite, Michael Fabry. The best joke at this year's Fringe is officially the work of the comedian and poet Rob Orton, who's just given up his job selling paintbrushes. Should he have done so? Here's the joke. I heard a rumour that Cadbury is bringing out an Oriental chocolate bar. Could be a Chinese whisper. Well, he told it rather better than I did. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Lots of programmes, seeing lots of new talent, filling up the cupboard. Quite honestly, for the next year, sometimes a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, you find yourself talking to producers, talking to talent, talking to agents, and you will refer back to Anne Edinburgh. You capture the spirit of comedy, what people are saying, how they're saying it, and you store it all up.
But Colin Anderson, what are you doing here? Because you normally make the Now show with very experienced comedians. Are you still looking for new talent for a show like that?
Yes, we're still looking for new talent for the Now show to some extent, but we're also looking... I make lots of different programmes for Radio 4, so I've got a stand-up show hosted by Stephen K. Amos coming up in the new year, which has got a different bill in each episode and themes, and so I need people for that. I need to find...
We're in the BBC's Blue Tent on the corner of Potter Row and Marshall Street, having fought our way past jugglers, fire eaters and flyer-flapping promoters. Where better for feedback to come to consider comedy on the radio? Joining me on the stage, I have some giants from the BBC world of radio comedy who can make or break careers with a flick of an eyelid. Caroline Raphael is Commissioner for Comedy and Fiction. Head of Radio for BBC Scotland is Jeff Szynski, and BBC comedy producer Colin Anderson. Now, Caroline, how do you justify your presence here at the festival?
Coming to Edinburgh is really important for me. I always see it. It's like being a squirrel and harvesting.
This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. We begin feedback this week with an email from a listener called Anne.
How much radio is to be ruined by its presenters wanting a jolly to Edinburgh? Those in front of a live audience in a tent programmes just serve to exclude the regular audience. I'm so glad you are too sensible to have succumbed to the lure.
Sorry, Anne. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is just too weak. So, welcome to Feedback in Edinburgh. He's appeared on almost every radio programme, so how could we be left out? Marcus Brigstock. Marcus, please take a seat. And before we discuss your relationship with the capital of North Britain, I think we should play a clip of a recent edition of your Radio 4 show, The Brig Society.
With any luck, installing a well-spoken Englishman as their king will give the Scotch a chance to have the arguments explained to them in a way that they will understand and decide not to go. Alex Salmond's very optimistic about it all. He describes the Scottish economy as a Celtic tiger, which is a lot like a normal tiger, except it's pissed and it's got type 2 diabetes.
New shows and new talent to develop. To pitch different series to Radio 4.
Jeff, do you hope, as part of your job here, head of Radio Scotland, to encourage these people to look over there and miss the best talent so you can keep it?
No, it's not just the biggest comedy festival in the world, it's the biggest arts festival in the world. And sometimes you can make the mistake of thinking that you're coming here to see Scottish comedy. I'm not coming here to see Scottish comedy. I can see Scottish comedy in clubs in Edinburgh and Glasgow all year round. What you're seeing here is some of the best performances, artists, writers in the world in the English language and beyond.
Well, that's the BBC talent, but we can't really have a feedback comedy special without some intentionally comic talent. So can I welcome to the stage a man whose poster here in Edinburgh says,